We will focus today on Miserere and some other choral music by MacMillan. He's known for his music, not only orchestral, but vocal. You could hear him in the burial of the Queen Elizabeth II and a lot of other music. As a radio presenter, I'm very used to present music by dead composers. Luckily, Sir James MacMillan is not dead, and I won't have to try and sum up his piece. Half of the time, I'm probably wrong when I do it. And instead, Sir James will give a short introduction of what the piece Miserere is about. And we will then hear the choir performance, and then we will talk a little bit about it. So, Sir James, will you just tell us a little bit about the Miserere that you wrote in 2009?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Is that coming through? Great. It's a delight to be here in Gothenburg. I've been here before. I conducted your wonderful orchestra some years ago, and it's wonderful to come back to do a very different kind of event today. I'm on my way to Örebro, I hope that's the right pronunciation, where I'm working with the Swedish Chamber Orchestra next week. They seem to like me, they keep inviting me back to conduct them, so I'm delighted about. Conducting some of my own music and music of Mendelssohn next week. And I'm delighted that Samuel was able to make this happen while I'm here in Sweden. And I've been working with the choir today, hearing them sing the Strathclyde motet that you just heard, and we've been working on my Miserere, which we'll sing for you just now, and we'll take it apart and talk about it. As Karin was saying, I do write a lot of choral music. I love the human voice. I love writing music for choir. Like in your country, there is a great choral tradition back home in the United Kingdom. Some of it is church-based, some of it is not, some of it's more secular. There are amateur choirs all over the United Kingdom, and the encouragement for people to sing has a long tradition back home, as it is here in Sweden too. So I get asked to write a lot for amateur choirs as well as professional choirs. Some of the music I write is settings of secular texts, but to be honest, most of the work I do is settings of liturgical texts, scriptural texts. And in fact, the Strathclyde motets, we've had one of them, there are 14 in all. They were written for a university choir back home in Glasgow, University of Strathclyde, and they were used initially as part of the liturgy in a Dominican church, a bit like this one, back home in Glasgow. I have very close associations with the Dominican order, and it's great to see the Dominican presence here in Gothenburg too. But the setting of the Miserere was written specifically for that British choir, well-known British choir, the 16, conducted by Harry Christophers. I have an ongoing relationship with that choir, having written a number of small and increasingly larger works for them, including my 5th symphony, which is a choral symphony, for 2 choirs and orchestra. And Harry Christophers gave the premiere of that in Edinburgh, at the Edinburgh Festival in 2019. I'm en route eventually to Amsterdam, where I'll give the Dutch premiere of that quite soon, next month. But this piece, Miserere, is a setting of Psalm 50, 51. And it's quite a substantial work for a choir to sing unaccompanied for 10, 11, 12 minutes. Is a substantial piece of commitment. It requires a lot of stamina, and there's a lot of text here in this psalm setting, in this psalm. Have mercy on me, God, according to thy great mercy. It's a penitential psalm. We hear it a lot during Lent. We especially hear it on Ash Wednesday. We sometimes hear it on Good Friday. Reading through my prayer book as I do, I see it crop up every Friday. So it's associated with the Friday. It's associated with the death of Christ. It's a text which invites the praying person deep into a penitential state, asking mercy on the individual soul, perhaps also on society, for our iniquities. And it's a heartfelt plea to the divine to give mercy to humanity. So it's a work which required a lot of introspection. The text takes us to some quite dark places, which Karin and I will talk about after we hear the piece. And I suppose compositionally, the challenge for me was to explore a number of different choral characteristics. The choir can do many great things, of course, and composers can utilise different kinds of techniques to explore the comparatively limited sound world of the choir. It's a monochrome sound. It's the voice and nothing but the voice. But there's some things that composers can do with voices together. One can explore polyphony, that is line against line. One can explore homophony, that is the whole choir working together in a kind of rhythmic unison, in a harmonic unison. One can pair the voices down to a single monodic line. One can pair the voices down to solo lines, where we hear individual voices beginning to emerge from the texture. All these different things are attempted in this setting of the Miserere. But I suppose at the heart of it, the DNA of this piece, and in fact the DNA of the other music we're looking at today, the Strathclyde motets, is Gregorian chant. It's a musical style which I'm sure you're aware of here in this church. It's a style that's associated with the church, with the Catholic Church especially. It's music which began in the first millennium of Christendom. And it's music, a pure, endless melodic music, which shaped much of the music of the next millennium, the second millennium, and was important to composers from Leonin and Periton, through Ockeghem and Obrecht, through to Palestrina and Josquin des Prés, Victoria, Monteverdi. You can hear the influence and the exerted impact of Gregorian chant. And it's still with us now in the third millennium, as I think you may hear in this work.
questions, you can just move up. So this piece, wonderfully formed and clear, it's the sibling piece of another Miserere, which we could hear fragments from. Could you just tell us a little bit about that and the starting point for this piece? Why did you start writing it in the first place?
Well, the piece came about as a companion piece for the famous Allegri Miserere. Harry Christophers wanted a new piece setting exactly the same text as Allegri had set hundreds of years ago. And composers nowadays, as you're probably aware, get many commissions like that. Could you write a companion piece for The Rite of Spring, or a companion piece for Beethoven's Fifth Symphony? And it's quite terrifying, really, to be handed a task like that, because you're always going to be compared to the original. So all that was very much in my mind as I approached this. Everyone knows the Allegri Miserere, those incredible ways that the sopranos soar up to the top Cs, and the deep prayerfulness of the music, the penitential nature of it. So I had to decide what, if anything, was there in that I could take and absorb and make my own, or could I go in a very different direction? Well, I think the one thing that I have taken from the Allegri is not the high Cs, the sopranos will be pleased to hear, but those kind of psalm tones, repeated psalm tones, the monotones that mostly repeat on the single note and then rise towards the end of the phrase. Allegri uses an unaccompanied version of it. I've accompanied it. I've accompanied each of those four phrases to begin with by different kinds of harmonizations, almost like a kind of organ effect from the Middle Ages. So there is that from the Allegri, but there's a lot of music and musical influences that we will not find in Allegri's piece. There's a memory of Scottish folk song in it. I mean, as a Scot, I've grown up with Scottish traditional music. It's there in the water, it's there in the air that you breathe. I used to play and sing a lot of Scottish folk music, traditional music, when I was younger. I think it shaped some of the melodic content of the piece. It's rooted very much in my own experience in that sense. So that was the reason for the piece and how it came about in the first place. And then Harry in the 16 first performed it in Belgium in 2009, and they've recorded it and performed it in many places ever since.
We will go through the piece section by section, and in the first, like 25 bars or something, you make a very strong starting point. As a listener, this first unison E really drives the listener into a certain mindset. You go from what you say in the music, desolate and cold, to something warmer. What do you want to sort of paint in that first opening statement?
Well, the text is fairly desolate. It's a deeply introspective penitential psalm asking the divine for mercy because of our iniquities, my iniquities, whether it's a personal plea or a civilizational plea. One could argue it's both personal and social in many ways. But it's music that certainly, it's a text which certainly looks into the abyss of the human soul. There's a lot of violent imagery throughout. Blood is mentioned a lot. Remember, this would have been written at a very violent time in Jewish history, and it seems to resonate with violent moments in our own histories as well, and in our own present. The fact that the word Holocaust is mentioned a couple of times can't be ignored. Obviously, the psalmist didn't know what was going to happen in the 20th century, but we do know what happened in the 20th century. And if there's ever a plea for mercy on humanity, it's for those crimes, the crimes that did lead to Holocaust. So one can't approach this without a deep resonance and memory of what has happened in our own time. Societal failure, civilizational collapse, and the triumph of evil is something that mankind needs to ask mercy for. But as I say, it's a text and it's a musical mood that steps up to the abyss. I think any composer setting this text is going towards something which is the abyss of human experience. But there has to be something in the Christian experience, whether it's a Christian artist or just a Christian generally, that approaches the abyss with the desire to redeem something of it, to step into the abyss or to the verge of the abyss and actually redeem it. So maybe that's why the music switches and swirls from one mood to the other. There is desolation and coldness, a sense of abandonment about a lot of the music, but there is a sense of resignation and hope, especially in the last few moments, where some kind of resignation, some kind of acceptance of our situation is reached.
We will hear the first section in just in a few seconds. I was Googling on a very Dutch website the thing about key characteristics. So this piece, for you who don't really know, it's in E minor. It starts in E minor, and if you write that on this website, you find that E minor is an innocent declaration of love, lament without grumbling, sighs accompanied by few tears, and this key speaks of the imminent hope of resolving in the pure happiness of C major. And all this happens kind of in your first 20 bars. It goes from E minor, desolate and cold, to C major is so much more warmth. But did you think about the key when you wrote this piece?
No,
was it a happy concept?
It's obviously, these things are just given. They're given in the stuff of music. Yeah. Composers approach questions of key and mode with a kind of subliminal memory of the purpose of the mode. And I'm astonished to hear you make that description. It just describes this piece in many ways. But it wasn't deliberate. It was very much a subconscious thing. So maybe that's what composers do. Maybe composers are drawn towards certain colours and modes and keys naturally and instinctively with a deep memory and realisation, an unspoken, perhaps even unthinking realisation of what that key or mode centre represents or can evoke.
Let's hear the first, say, 25 bars.
Yes.
Where do you find super good stuff?
Okay, so we hear, I mean, just before we get to it, the last thing that you heard was it sounded like a hymn, and we'll explain a little bit about that. It's a pre-existing melody of mine I've used in other works, but it does sound quite hymnic when it gets to E major at the end of the piece. But this is the version in E minor, the original version of Light, which is minorish, desolate and cold. And with a little crescendo and an accelerando, the music does move to a different place. And we hear monody for the first time. So we've heard homophony, we've heard the hymnic, the anthemic, if you like, but we also, within these 20, 30 bars, we hear monody. That is a line on its own for the first time. So exploring that side of the choir, the fact that you can pare it right down to a single line, unadorned by anything else. And then the beginnings of polyphony, just a little canon between the two soprano parts.
That's where in Allegri the high C comes. Wash me from my sin. But you do something completely different here. Some kind of canon, some kind of Gaelic.
Yes, it does sound Gaelic to me. Certainly there's a kind of Celtic overtone in the shaping of the melody, but even in the very primitive counterpoint that's emerging, it's just two lines, more or less of the same melody, ordered in a different rhythmic way each time. But we have this thing in Scotland, in the Northern Isles, in the Western Isles, in the Presbyterian tradition, the Free Presbyterian, which is an even more austere version of Scottish Presbyterianism, of the congregation singing psalms together. What happens is that a cantor leads with an ornamented version of the psalm melody, and the congregation follow him. Now, I think the congregation think they're singing in unison, but they're not. They're singing in canon. In fact, the most beautiful thing about it is that they're not together. One voice will go a couple of seconds before the others, following the same psalm tone, same line. And what happens is that because they're singing the same melody, maybe a split second apart between the voices, it creates a kind of heterophony. That is, melody creates harmony, melody creates texture. And it's one of the most beguiling and strange and mysterious vocal sounds on the planet. And if you don't know it, I would suggest you Google it. Just Gaelic psalm singing from the Western Isles. You'll be amazed at just how strange it is, but also how beautiful it is. And I think I've been influenced by this. My approach to the choir can sometimes be about that heterophony. How do I create a sense of texture, harmonic texture, out of an individual line? And this we just heard there was the beginning of that happening.
And already, I mean, if you, from the start, it's amazingly beautiful, but I wouldn't be able to tell that this is James MacMillan until maybe bar 7.
Because of the grace notes?
Yeah, because it's kind of unconventional, the way that you use grace notes. That's one of my first memories of singing your music, is sang the tenor responsories. And I don't remember the grace notes. But now I remember more, but here it was like already in the start, in the kind of almost choral-like start. You introduce them.
Well, I think this also comes from traditional music, Scottish traditional music, both in vocal music from Scotland, like the psalm singing I was talking about, but also secular music, the great ballad tradition of Scotland. There's an awful lot of ornaments used, and sometimes they're just instinctive and improvised or quasi-improvised. It just seems to be part of the natural style and aesthetic of singing Scottish traditional music, but it's also there in instrumental music too. If you look at music for the bagpipes, it's absolutely saturated with grace notes. In fact, it's the grace notes that make the pibroch of Scottish bagpipe music so wonderful. And it's the grace notes which attract the attention of judges, and there are lots of competitions about bagpipe playing back in Scotland, and it's the way that they handle the grace notes, and especially the more complex flurries of notes that can attract the attention of the judges. And the great pipers in Scotland are very adept at using these grace notes. So I think Scottish traditional music, vocal and instrumental, is saturated with grace notes, and I've just picked it up from there.
We will hear this section that we just started, maybe 25 to 63. And then we will hear this grace note rich heterophony. But also, I was wondering about the text in this section. It feels like in, say, bar 47, we talked a little bit about that. In my ears, it's almost ugly, but it's totally congenial with the text, and then it goes to some kind of surrenderance in the end of the section. What happens text-wise?
Yes, well, at that very bar, the text in English is, well, the full sentence is, "For I know my iniquity, and my sin is always before me. Tibi soli peccavi, et malum coram te feci." So the text at this point is actually addressing the question of human evil. And I think any composer who values word painting and sound painting, especially when one is dealing with text as vivid as this and as evocative as this, has to explore some of the darker territories of music. And I think you're right, there's a lot of euphony in this music. There's a lot of this music which is very euphonious, and it follows harmonic and melodic patterns. But there are moments where chromaticism enters, foreign notes. You know, again, that very bar that you're talking about, against a C major chord in the lower parts, we've got A flats and F sharps, so really quite distant notes on the word sin. So I suppose the composer's painterly instincts kick in when one wants to paint a darker aspect of human nature at these points.
Let's listen to it.
Okay. Thank you. So this is bar 25 with the soprano 1 entry, amplius. Sopranos.
The next section that we're coming up to, now with actually very much a live composer and very much a conducting composer, I thought we would ask Sir James that you take the next section of the piece and run it through the choir, and then just give us a couple of minutes of letting us hear what you hear, so that you instruct the choir for a little bit. Just what is important for you to focus on in this, from what you hear, and if you would have a concert with them next week, not last week, but next week.
Yes. Up until this?
Let's go to maybe 96.
Okay. Right, from bar 64 then. So in our rehearsal earlier today, We did talk a little bit about this section. Ecce enim iniquitatibus, for behold, I was conceived in iniquities, and in sins did my mother conceive me. It's quite dark and introspective. But it is one of these moments in the piece where a strong, almost hymnic homophony comes back. And I asked the tenors and basses initially to go a very emphatic ecce, behold. And there's a lot of added material to this music. There's lots of accents, there's lots of staccatos, there's lots of tenuto markings, there's a lot of information about how this music could be delivered. So we talked a lot about that, you know, the different kind of attacks that we could have, and the different phraseology, especially now that there's a lot of tenuto and some degree of smoothness in lines, as well as some of the sort of jumpy, aggressive lines as well. It then gives way to the full choir singing in unison. There's another thing that a choir can do. Of course it can sing with all these complex parts, 4 parts, up to 40 parts and beyond sometimes. But here is a moment where everyone is joined as one. Et in peccatis concepit me. Sharing the joint emotions of the text, all singing as one person, as it were. So we worked a lot about that, on that, you know, getting a sense of unison, before the music then gradually evolves into pure polyphony, a kind of 21st century polyphony, where the 4 parts are quite distinct. And the music of Allegri, the music of Palestrina, and so on, that's music that means a lot to me. I regard Palestrina and the great contrapuntalists of that period as some of my great teachers. I learned so much from studying species counterpoint and how Palestrina and William Byrd and Victoria and Allegri and others put line against line to make something bigger than just one line. So it's those kind of things that we worked hard at this morning. Ecce. Yes, so I suppose what I would work at in a rehearsal of a section like that is the breadth of emotion. It covers not just a lot of musical techniques, from homophony to monody to polyphony, but the moods are quite wide apart as well. And I suppose this is the aspiration of a composer. It's the challenge a composer has when you set a text like this. I mean, on one level, a text like this it delivers one message. It's one emotion. It's one of grief. It's one of introspection. It's one of penitence. But a composer can't leave it at the one thing. There has to be a whole range of different levels to that grief, to that penitence, to that sense of desolation. And in a section like this, there are so many different ways of going about it. And I suppose even when one has, I would say, the relative limitations of a choral sound, and that's no comment on you choir, of course. A choir does have a limitation to its sound compared to an orchestra, for example, which is this vast array of colours using percussion instruments and harps and woodwind and brass and so on. Here it's just the human voice, and this is both a limitation, but it's one of the great glories of what the choir can do. And therefore the challenge for a composer in setting a text like this is to try so many different avenues and perspectives on what the human voice is in combination like this can achieve.
And now we're going into a real allegro world again. So it's harmonized song tone?
Yes, I mean the psalm tone, I think it might even be the one that Allegri uses, I can't quite remember now, but it's certainly one that one knows through liturgy. If you go to high mass here or anywhere else, and the choir is singing Gregorian chant and psalm tones, it's usually this one. There are others too, of course.
Yeah. Would you just sing it until maybe 104?
Okay. So from 9 to 7. It's all that world.
Yeah. And how did the Gregorian chant come to be such a big part of your composing?
Well, I don't think it's just me. I think, as I said earlier, Gregorian chant does have this extraordinary origin in the first millennium. Although some people, some scholars, have explored the origins of Gregorian chant and have found remnants or pre-echoes of it in music from before Christ that would have been used in the Jewish temple. And scholars have explored and compared Jewish chant, which is still in use in synagogues, and the contours, the melodic contours are in some cases very similar to the contours of this kind of thing, but also some of the more elaborate Gregorian chant. So you could say that Gregorian chant has its roots in the music of our Jewish origins. before Christ. Which is quite an amazing thought to consider it, that Jesus himself, who was a singer, we know that because first century Jews would have sung their prayers, would have sung the Psalms, would have sung this text in Hebrew, and who knows, he may have heard or even sung melodic contours not too dissimilar from some of the things that are still being used in the Christian world today. So that's an incredible thought, in the fact that Jesus himself was a singer. He sang his prayers, and that we can trace this line through him, with him, before him, right through this first millennia into what in essence has been the golden age of liturgical music, from the Middle Ages right through to the likes of Monteverdi and Bach and so on. And the Gregorian chant is absolutely central to the making of that music. The composers of that music, from Leonin, Obrecht, Ockeghem, right through to Monteverdi, would have known the chant. They would have chant books sitting in their desks. They would write masses based on chant, and so on. So it's really part of the DNA of Western arts music. And it didn't disappear with the Reformation and modernity. The fascination of chant continued. Mozart, when he went to that famous, or some might say mythological visit to the Sistine Chapel, where he heard the Allegri, Miserere, and notated it and stole it, so I took it out of the Sistine Chapel. He would have heard Gregorian chant sung at every mass he went to. In fact, he famously said that the Exultet, which is this great Easter rejoicing hymn sung at Easter Vigil, starts like that, happened quite recently. He said that was the most beautiful melody ever created by a human being. Now, coming from Mozart, that's high praise today. But so even Mozart was fascinated by chant. And right through to our own time, the composers of the 20th century, who have shown that religion is still a vibrant part of music culture. Messiaen was fascinated with Gregorian chant, would remodelize chants to make his own incredible organ music. My old mentor, Peter Maxwell Davies, was no friend of the church in any way, but he had a copy of the Liber Usualis on his desk and referred to it every day, because he saw in chant a perfect music, a perfect, endless melody.
There's been studies made on babies, if they prefer Gregorian chant or Lutheran chorals. And the Gregorian chants won big time. I think we will do the next section, which starts with my favorite bar in the piece. It's empty. It's not my favorite part. But it reminds me of that. It's often come up when I've listened to things that you talk about. The importance of silence, both outer silence and inner silence. Can we listen to this bit? Maybe until 138.
Yes.
And then maybe talk a little bit about how to find the silence.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, so this is bar 100. Well, let's do the silent part. 105 up to just before the Senza Misura. So don't go into the chant times at the Senza Misura. So we'll start in absolutely right to draw attention to that bar, a bar of deliberate silence. I do that quite a lot. I think silences are part of music. It's certainly part of the great choral tradition, and it would be part of the way that composers from the past would have exploited these great open spaces where sound would have resonated into the emptiness. That sound would have resonated into the silence. There's no such thing as silence. John Cage was onto something when he said that silence is important, but there's actually no such thing as silence because that would be a vacuum. So what do we hear in the silence? And his piece 433, of course, is a kind of provocation to our listening sensibilities or lack of them. But the curious thing about that piece 433, I don't know if you've ever attended a performance of it, students like doing it, 4 minutes 33 seconds of just sitting doing nothing and allowing one to focus on the nothingness, what is in the human heart, what is in the air, what is in the sounds outside. But the original title that he planned to give 433 was Silent Prayer. So even John Cage, with his counter-cultural wackiness, was onto something. It was a search for the sacred, which shows that music has never really given up on the search for the sacred. I mentioned Messiaen before, but it's there in the music of the great composers of the 20th century. John Cage chose to study with Schoenberg because he was a fellow mystic, and Schoenberg was obsessed with silence. And Schoenberg reconverted to a practicing Judaism after leaving Germany in the 1930s. The other great polar opposite in early modernism from Schoenberg was Stravinsky, who set the Mass, who set the sounds. And you can see silence means a lot to these composers. That search for the sacred, the search for God in modernity is very much part of what modernism is all about. The great Russian composer, Alfred Schnittke, talked in terms of silent tones, so that he would actually write in silences that were just as important to him in the fabric of the music as the notes themselves. So silence does play a part in the fabric of music, the construction of music, the perception of music. But it's just simply, I think, an indication that music begins in silence. Composers know and feel that their music, that sound that they give to the world, begins in the silence of their hearts. And it's a paradoxical situation that this thing which is full of sound and convulsive human emotion begins in a state of nothingness, in a state of absence, the absence of sound. It's in the silence of the heart that the music begins.
You rehearsed the choir before, and if you would rehearse the audience instead, what would that be like? What is a good listener?
Well, that's
how do you listen to music in a good way?
Well, it's a very good question, because composers meet many different kinds of listeners throughout one's life, and some listeners are interested in what we're doing, some listeners are not interested at all in what we're doing, and that's just life. But I suppose composers have to approach a listener, and an audience is made up of individuals, it's not a single unitary body. But one hopes that within a body of listeners there is someone who, and this is where I sound a little bit arrogant, but I don't mean to be, someone a bit like me. And what I mean by that is someone who is curious and hungry to encounter music they don't know yet, as I am. A composer has to be curious about the unknown, has to be curious about music not yet imagined, if you like, or just the most recent music. And some people don't have that curiosity. I concede that. Some listeners know what they like and like what they know, and they don't really give much space to people like me who are imagining new sounds all the time. Fair enough. But I hope that one encounters a degree of curiosity in a listener, and a desire to listen and hear new things.
I was curious about the concept of, that you mentioned in some podcast or program about obedient listening, like how do we as listeners relate to the fairly long time span of classical piece.
Yeah.
What is it that you mean with that?
Well, this is the great challenge that classical music has in our era, because it is argued that people have lost their ability to concentrate for long periods of time, not just in music, but in lots of things. Reading, having conversations with friends. That requires an obedience of sorts. It requires an obedience and respect of the other. But when it comes to music, it requires a willingness to be ready to give up, to sacrifice a lot of your time to this objective other, which is music, in the hope and in the expectation that one's inner soul can actually be affected and indeed changed by music. Music has this power to change individuals and to have a spiritual impact. But that won't happen if we don't give over and sacrifice the time that is required. And sometimes that means being obedient in time, giving up a lot, sometimes not just 3 minutes, but hours. And then a musician's whole life is a lifetime that you sacrifice to music.
It reminds me of a quote by Bernstein, where he says that music can't change events, but it changes people, which in their turn changes the events. But let's obediently and curiously listen to the next bit, just up until the E major part. There's from 140 until 165, perhaps, and then we're almost...
Okay. Somebody wants to do that. So we'll take it through to the end. Take it through to the end and where we left off. So, yeah, so this is the sentence in Miserere 141, the A major chord. Tenors that just pick up with dominate on the downbeat.
So this last bit, this, as Samuel said yesterday, this barn of beauty. So wonderful. It's like the crown jewel of the piece for when, as a listener at least, when you've lived through these stages of repentance and regrets and remorse and everything, and then you reach this redemption in a way, both musically and maybe theologically.
Yeah. Well, as I say, there is a sense of acceptance at the end of the piece. And I also said that this is a pre-existent melody of mine. I've used it in secular music, I've used it in other sacred music. It's become a kind of idée fixe of mine. It's usually, in my mind, I don't know why this is, it's associated with holiness. It's cropped up in a setting of Sanctus, or Holy, Holy. It's cropped up in the setting of Sanctus Deus in one of the Passion settings I've done. So it's obviously gearing towards holiness. And if anything is to be accepted about the question of penitence, it is an act of holiness. An act of holiness on our part, but also an act of holiness on the part of God who forgives us. So there's a reason why there's this holy moment, as it were, as it transforms from the minor to the major.
Yeah. So, as Sir James mentioned in the beginning, the opening statement, or the opening verse, we heard here, but in major. And the text is slightly, for a modern listener, problematic.
Well, it's just because it mentions Holocaust, and of course, at the time of the psalmist writing these psalms, there was violence involved, but it was the sacrifice of animals. But we now see it through the lens of the Third Reich and the 20th century Holocaust. And we can't help that. It's just something we have to take on board in the performance and in the reception of a piece like this.
I know I said it to you, and I heard the other day the concept of Felix Culpa. I don't know if I understood it right, but it's kind of the idea that maybe you know it, but the happy thought, or however unfortunate the sin or the fall was in the beginning, it kind of drove us to a bigger love of Christ, or that through the sacrifice of Christ, our relationship altered. And I think that gets so strong in the end. Can we just hear the end once more, and then we'll finish with the Strathclyde number 2, and then it's time for a break.
Okay. Right, so this is from bar 165 again. I suppose this is the moment where the music does redeem the abyss, as our text was talking about earlier.
Oh, death-clad motets. It's for the feast of Christ the King. The communion. Sedebit Dominus